Hi, good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm Bill Schleiser, Delta Institute CEO. We're really excited for everybody to be attending tonight our virtual Green Soapbox hosted by Delta's Associate for the Delta Emerging Leaders. I'm going to jump in. I'm super excited about the topic tonight. It's one of really important to what Delta does and to all of our great panelists tonight. And there it goes. So for those that don't know Delta, we're happy to have you here tonight. And just a little bit about us, we work across the Midwest directly with communities to solve complex environmental challenges. And it really runs the gamut of all things sustainability, from pollution, community redevelopment, economic opportunity, and of course with water issues and climate change. We do this because we know that the Midwest region is one that we can have landscapes and communities thriving through an integrated approach to improving the environmental, economic, and social conditions. And I urge everybody to go check out all the great work that we do at www.delta-institute.org. We deal with water and climate change throughout most of our portfolio of work. It's really something core to the work that we do. For example, right now we're working on planting over 700 trees in Michigan to treat 25,000 gallons of stormwater annually, as well as a community beautification project that goes along with that to extend a bike trail so that residents have access to the lakeshore and recreation opportunities. In addition, we work directly with municipalities to help plan, design, and implement green infrastructure designs and integrating those into municipal kind of decision-making, budgeting, operations, and maintenance strategies. This runs the whole gamut from bioswales, rain gardens, permeable pavement, thinking about transportation options differently, and how we recreate natural conditions in a way that benefits the community. Additionally, we have a whole design guide around how you can implement green infrastructure, which is available at our tools and resources part of our website. And it's really interesting for me personally. I've been at Delta since 2004. And in 2013, the state of Michigan had to pass an emergency dredging bill of over $20 million because the lake levels were so low that some of the ports in Michigan couldn't be utilized. Fast forward to today, where we're in unprecedented territory with how high the water levels are. We know that volatility is one of those things that's going to be affecting us every day, and we definitely saw it in Chicago yesterday, that kind of increase in volatility, and the lake levels are one of those things. So I'm really excited about that. In addition to kind of all of this work that we're doing, Delta is going to be launching a project in partnership with Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Cam Davis and GEI Consultants, with an Army Corps of Engineer pilot project with 4 North Shore communities. And it's actually a really interesting project. This is one of 10 pilots throughout the country that Army Corps is doing to reuse dredge material in a way that is beneficial to the beaches of those communities. And we're really excited to be working with Evanston, Lake Bluff, Glencoe, and North Chicago to figure out how to make all of this work so that residents really have access to high quality spaces in the Great Lakes. We can maintain natural habitat, reduce long-term management costs, and really plan for the future of how we manage our coastlines differently, while keeping costs in line, because that's one of the things that, as municipalities know, budgets are tight. And at Delta, we do a lot of things, and we as a nonprofit, we need your support. So, thank you all to have donated the $10 to help us put on a webinar like this. You can, if you haven't yet, you can go to delta-institute.org/donate and do that. And all contributions are welcome. In addition, if you haven't been bidding like I have, we are running a silent auction, and you can see the link right there. Please outbid me on a couple things. As much as I want everything, I think that we have some great things from all of our sponsors of the silent auction. So be sure to check that out, and I'll be happy to rebid and overbid some of you on some of this stuff. And then additionally, I just want to thank our sponsor of this event, the Schneider Electric Foundation. They're a really great partner, and we couldn't put this on without support like that. And there we go. So Let's talk about our hosts, the DELs, the Delta Emerging Leaders, the Associate Board of the Delta Institute. They're a great group of ambassadors for us as an organization. I like to say they do the cool things that I wish I could do, but don't have the time to be able to do. And the DELs do a great job putting on really great events throughout the year, the Green Soapbox being one of them. And the purpose of this event tonight is to really amplify the voices of what's happening in Chicago and around the Midwest, and showcase what environmental experts are doing and what sustainable entrepreneurs are doing throughout the region to really move sustainability forward. While we're talking about beach erosion and climate change tonight, past Green Soapboxes have focused on stories about Chicago's green entrepreneurs. What's worked, what's failed, how can we learn from each other in the experience of sustainable entrepreneurship in the city? Energy and cybersecurity. That was one of those ones where you get talking about a topic and it kind of like blows your mind how everything is interconnected when you think about sustainability and how you move things forward. Talking about how we change the energy status quo. Our energy infrastructure really needs to be looked at. And I think from things that have happened recently, that's doubly for sure. And then innovations in Chicago's green economy. Great topic talking about what we can be doing to create sustainable and future forward jobs for the next generation. Now, around the program tonight, we're going to have some great panelists who will get introduced in a minute. And we're going to have time for questions at the end. We're going to have an active chat, so please put any questions or comments into that chat, and we'll be utilizing that for the questions. Also, if you're having any problems with Zoom, volume, and seeing things, feel free to message our host in the chat window as well. And if you want to share our conversation tonight, we're going to be publishing later this week on Delta's YouTube channel. And there's details on all of those things on our website on how to follow us via social media platforms. Ooh, sorry about that, everybody. So before we kick it off, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening. Welcome, Jerome McDonnell. Jerome has hosted Worldview, WBEZ's Global Affairs program since 1994. And he is also currently WBEZ's environmental reporter. He joined WBEZ back in 1984 thinking he was going to have a Peace Corps-like internship and then go on to other things. And something stuck because all of a sudden he was producing other shows and you can now call him kind of a public radio lifer. Jerome produced the internationally focused program Midday with Sandra Gare and took over as host after Sandra passed away. And then for a stint, he was also not only producing programming and running Worldview, but also the executive director of talk programming for WBEZ, something that he chose to focus back onto the production and reporting parts and let's leave the management part behind. And we're happy that he's here tonight and making a difference. Jerome believes that broadcasting's highest calling is to bring people together to make difference. And that's something that's even core to what we do at Delta. We love bringing people together, learning about how we can work together, and creating solutions that work for everybody. And I'm a trivia buff myself, and if some trivia about Jerome is that he has the messiest desk at WBEZ, something that I might be able to compete with him for at Delta Institute. And he is the team leader for WBEZ's Bike to Work Week Challenge. Our team leader has joined us as well. So you guys maybe can trade notes about how to motivate people to bike during a pandemic, which was a fun challenge for us at Delta. So Jerome, I will let you take it over from here. Thanks so much.
Bill, thank you. And thank you, Delta and everyone for doing this. This is a great idea and a really timely topic, I think. And I hope that we all learn something here this evening and we come away better prepared and more knowledgeable and know what to do about lake levels in the future. I was going to introduce the panelists this evening, and then we're going to have some little opening statements from each of them, and then we'll start a conversation and have question and answer after that. So I'm going to introduce the four, and you might know Cam Davis was with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. He was elected in 2018 there, and he's also a vice president at GEI Consultants. He was with the Obama administration coordinating the work of 11 federal departments on Great Lakes matters and serving as a liaison to Congress on the Great Lakes. He is an attorney, an environmental attorney, and he is also, to this conversation, a former CEO of the Great Lakes. Great to have Cam Davis with us tonight. Also with us is Mila Marshall, and she is the incoming Clean Water Associate for the Sierra Club, and she starts there August 17th. She's a doctoral candidate at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and in biology, and she's a former research associate with the Freshwater Lab and a former Delta Institute person herself. Great to have Mila Marshall with us today. Also with us on the sciencey side of things is Veronica. She is a climate extension specialist with Sea Grant and the Midwest Regional Center. Both are associated with the University of Illinois. On the community side, we have Tom Heineman. He is with the Greater Eastlake Terrace Park Advisory Council. He is one of the founders there, and he is a 40-year resident of Eastlake Terrace, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen pictures of some of the condo associations that are right across the street from his, that are hanging out there into Michigan, and we'll be talking about this from a community viewpoint as well. But I want to start with Cam Davis. We have a little opening statement from him and talk a little bit about himself and what he thinks about Great Lakes water levels here. Cam Davis.
Great. Jerome, thanks so much. I always like to start out with a little bit of a sound check in our Zoom-driven lives. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
So? Okay. Great. Well, Jerome, thanks. Bill and Delta, thank you for hosting so much. Mila and Tom and Veronica, thanks for being panelists with me. This is really fun to dive in. And before I get going, I also want to recognize Dawn Walker. Dawn is on my staff at the Water Reclamation District, and many of you know her already from her great work at the Center for Neighborhood Technology before she decided to make the plunge and join me on my staff earlier this year. So I just want to chat very quickly about two things. We could probably make a whole semester out of tonight's discussion, but we'll try to boil that down into 4 minutes. Climate change and its impacts, and then what can we do about it? But I really view climate change as mostly manifesting itself, the impact of climate change, manifesting itself most visibly and most acutely in our water resources. And nothing's more visible to us than the impacts that we see out on Lake Michigan. And I know we're going to talk about this a whole lot more. So I'm really only going to scratch the surface and really provide you with a teaser. But climate change shows itself through water resources, and I think as a result it also manifests itself in terms of equity in our society. So one of the things that we're seeing right now is higher lake levels. In my role at GEI Consultants, we're working with Delta to land a project that will help us do some beach work along the coast, because beaches are one of the places where that is the place where land meets the water. And since we as Homo sapiens live on land, we don't live in the water, one of the best places for us to be able to experience changes in our water resources is along the coast. So as we see high lake levels are creating an impact, and that's largely a function of the higher precipitation and the more intense precipitation that we're getting. It's also a function of when that precipitation happens. I can get into this in more detail, but typically what we see is lake levels starting to rise in the winter and spring, then tapering off in the summer and starting to go down in the summer and fall seasons. Recently, we've seen rain happening more and more in the summer and fall. At a time when evaporation is supposed to give us a break. And that didn't happen last year. And as a result, our lake levels went up higher. But it's not just a function of lake levels, it's also a function of the intensity of the storms that we have. We may not see rain necessarily, or even have necessarily high lake levels, but if we have a big nor'easter that pushes waves from the northeast to the southwest of the lake towards Chicago, our coasts are going to get battered. And folks like Tom know this firsthand. It's also a matter of equity as well, where we see some of our more flood-prone communities around Cook County that the Water Reclamation District serves as being inundated more frequently than other places. And some of the work that I'm doing and we're doing at the Water Reclamation District is intended to help our disproportionately impacted areas from these new and newer dynamics caused by climate change. That's the what's going on. What can we do about it? There are many, many things, but I'm just going to stick to one for right now. The Water Reclamation District, I think, has a big role to play in terms of mitigating climate change impacts and adapting to climate change impacts on our water resources. Right now, the Water Reclamation District largely uses energy from three sources. About a third from coal burning, about a third from nuclear, and about a third from natural gas. There are some other smaller energy sources in there, but those are the big three. We need to transition away from these sources. It does not make sense for us as an environmental agency to be strictly going with the cheapest sources of energy, when basically what that does is push costs out to society in other ways, like childhood asthma. I'm convinced that some of these quote unquote cheap sources of energy may be inexpensive, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily cheap as we push the impacts out to others. So one of the things that I am committed to doing as a commissioner is helping to lead the charge to change up the Water Reclamation District's energy portfolio to move towards renewables and what I'll call recoverables like biogas. And I think there's a role for everybody on this virtual meeting to play, and many, many others to help support that kind of a transitional agenda. Jerome, I'll leave it at that. I hope that that was within 4 or so minutes.
Sounds good. That was very interesting. And it'll get us right into the discussion here in a minute. I want to swing over to Mila Marshall. And Mila, I mentioned, is the incoming Clean Water Association Sierra Club. And introduce herself, say a few things about her relationship with the lake and what's happening with the rising lake levels. Hi, Mila.
Hi, thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. My name is Mila Marshall. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you again for inviting me. I feel like I toe the line between science and community, and when I was invited, I was really excited because I am starting this new position with the Sierra Club, and I claim to be an aquaholic in all things water. I am a native Chicagoan and grown up on the south side, but also recently moved from the north side of Chicago, and I'm very familiar with the two beaches, the northernmost beaches in Chicago that kind of no longer exist. So I was a resident of the north side for about 8 years. And you know, what I hope to kind of add to this conversation is just an understanding of the decision making that needs to happen for the protection of our shoreline in an equitable fashion. At the moment, there are things happening on the north side and the south side that require attention, and most of the development that requires environmental decision making often has a feeling of either or instead of both and. So I carry with me the spirit of Delta, and that there isn't an either or. There is a way that we can support healthy economies as well as a healthy environment. And am excited to contribute conversations about equity in the decision-making process, as well as the protection of the shoreline for all of Chicagoans. So thank you for having me.
Great to have you, Mila. And we'll swing over and hear from Veronica Fall now. She's the Climate Extension Specialist at Sea Grant and the Midwest Regional Climate Center, and definitely holds up the climate end on the panel. How are you, Veronica?
Hi, thanks for the introduction, and thank you everyone at Delta for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here tonight with all of the other panelists. So with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant and also the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, both of which are at the University of Illinois. I'm mostly focused on the science of climate and climate change, both in terms of the historical context and contextualizing where we can expect to be, but also summarizing the here and now, such as what has the last season shown us in terms of the extremes of the climate that we've been observing, mostly around the Great Lakes region, but I am primarily focused on the greater Chicagoland area. And so with this work, again, looking forward, as Commissioner Davis said, with regards to lake levels, it is a balance of how much you're putting into the system and how much you're taking out. So just as an example, within the past 3 years, if you think back to May 2018, that at the time was the record wettest May for the Chicago area back in 2018. We topped that in 2019. 2019 became the record wettest May. And then just this past year, yet again, in May, just over halfway through the month, broke that record again. And so we're seeing a lot of this accumulation, specifically in the springtime season, but that input is one of the main contributing factors to the high lake levels. So I'm sure we'll get into more of the science later in the discussion, but once again, thank you for having me, and I look forward to the questions tonight.
Well, thank you, Veronica. And last up is Tom Heineman, and he's with the Greater Eastlake Terrace Advisory Park Council. He was one of the founders of that as a 40-year Eastlake Terrace there right up against Lake Michigan. And thanks very much for joining us, Tom. I know you've got an interesting story to tell about your relationship.
Yeah, as Jerome, well, first of all, thanks for having this discussion. It's near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time in the last few years advocating for our beaches on Eastlake Terrace, along with the Park Advisory Council. We formed in 2015 due to losing our beaches. And we thought the Park District was not giving us much attention. We felt downstream from the North Shore where they were doing lots of sand management, but everything seemed to stop as soon as you hit the city, and our beaches were eroding away. This year in the fall, we had record high lake levels as well as some amazingly strong storms that were threatening the parks in along Eastlake Terrace. Not just the beaches, but the actual parks were eroding away. And as a result, the Park District and the city invested millions of dollars in rocks that protected the parks, but destroyed the beaches. And I think Patrick has a picture of Juneway Terrace before the stone. Patrick, can you pull that up real quick?
Sure thing, give me a moment.
This will give you an example of what it looked like in October, November timeframe. And this may be a lot of the future we're going to see if we don't act soon. Okay, so you see that, you probably saw this on the news in the fall, but that is Juneway Terrace Beach and Park. Obviously no beach left. They had repaired that wall several times in the last few years, and finally the wall just, even though they had repaired it, it gave way. And if you see that crevice there, that's heading for the sidewalk, which is heading for Eastlake Terrace. And that's when the Army Corps came in and the contractors to put rocks there. And if Patrick can show the drone shot of this beach and Rogers Beach, you'll see the results of, yeah, there we go. So Juneway Terrace is the beach on the north where all those rocks are. Rogers Beach is on the south where all those rocks are. Rogers Beach had sand the year before. We no longer have any sand. So that kind of, in a nutshell, is what has happened to our beaches. We've saved the parks, but lost the beaches. So that that's why I'm here, just to give some of my background or some of the history of what's happened with our beaches. We would like some access to the water, and we've kind of lost that. So
right.
I think that's about it, Jerome.
Yeah, that's some powerful visuals there. You know, I remember them from the news, but every time you see them, they're, that's like, oh boy, when the lake comes, you know, it comes. I wanted to get into, like, we heard from Cam a little bit about what the lake is doing, and I'm not sure everybody, you know, is on the same page when it comes to what the lake has been doing in recent years. And, you know, I was some people who discussed it as a 30-year cycle that the lake usually goes through from high to low, and now it's gone through a cycle in 6 years from low to high. And how do you describe what has changed here, and what conclusion we should draw from these kind of changing patterns that have no precedent? Cam, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks, Jerome. I do recall that the word on the street for decades has been that the Great Lakes move in these 30-year cycles. And that was as true as long as there was a stable, consistent climate. What we have seen lately are lots of changing dynamics, which then express themselves in terms of lake levels. So, for example, we have seen over the past decade, I think we've had several winter vortexes. Why is that important? People don't associate lake levels with winter vortexes. Well, when we have these flash freezes that then turn out to be more than just a flash, ice covers or virtually covers the lake. For example, a few years ago, I think we almost tied a record for ice cover on Lake Michigan, with about 93% of Lake Michigan being covered by ice. Well, what does that mean? And why are winter vortexes associated with lake levels? If ice covers the lake, then what we've essentially done is taken plastic wrap and covered the lake. It essentially seals moisture in to Lake Michigan and the rest of the Great Lakes, and any other water resource for that matter, so that that evaporation cannot take place. You'll recall from my opening statement, there are really two things at play with lake levels. They're both, I call them the two shuns. There's precipitation and then there's evaporation. And if we seal water into the lake by having ice cover, then that reduces the ability of the lake to essentially off-gas, to vaporize what could be billions of gallons of water out of the lakes and move that into the atmosphere, and then essentially retains it. So that's been one dynamic. Another dynamic has been, as I mentioned before, you usually see, hopefully I can do this graphically for those of you who are watching, but we see a hydrological cycle of ups and downs seasonally. And if you look at the hydrograph from Lake Michigan last year, it was really unusual. Instead of going from winter and spring with lake levels going up, then summer, fall, winter, lake levels down, we saw lake levels go up in the winter and spring and then flatline in the summer and fall. Why? Because, as you may recall, last year we had a lot of precipitation that happened from June all the way through October. In fact, in early October of last year, we had what we call river reversals at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, where Plan A, B, and C, we exhausted all three of those plans and went to Plan D, which is to have to open the gates so that Chicago area waterway system, Chicago River water, had to get pushed out into Lake Michigan. And that was early October of last year due to the heavy rains that we received in early October. We usually don't see big rains in the fall, at least in the recent past. So last year we flatlined. Those lake levels never had a chance to go down as they are supposed to do in that kind of summer, fall seasonal cycle. And so that's been another thing. And then finally, I'll mention, and these are just indicative, I could go on with lots of factors, but we've had, I won't call it a new dynamic, but it's happening a whole lot more, where in the wintertime, we'll have snow covering the ground is frozen, and then we'll have a flash thaw. And some of you may remember that this happened not this year, but a year ago, February, where we had snow on the ground, frozen landscape, and all of a sudden a thaw. And what happens is we get a rain event, but there's still snow on the ground and the ground is still frozen. So all that rain comes down, and instead of being absorbed into the landscape, it winds up going right into the gutters, which then can have the possibility of overwhelming our hard engineered infrastructure that we have at the Water Reclamation District. These are all climatological dynamics that are happening more and more and more that exacerbate the whipsaw effect that Jerome was talking about. So instead of a 30-year cycle, we're seeing extremes in a much more compressed time frame, where we had really low lake levels in 2013, just 6-7 years ago. And over the past 2 years, we've seen, as we heard before from Veronica, record monthly lake levels.
I want to give Veronica a chance to weigh in on this too, since this is kind of her wheelhouse here on climate. Do you have some thoughts about what we're seeing and what's, the kind of different dynamic that we're seeing that is causing this persistent high lake level?
Well, I think Commissioner Davis really hit on all of the main points. Just for those who are unaware, kind of the last time the lake levels were at their peak was in the late 90s, around 1997. And so while we are in that timing for a 30-year cycle of being at a natural climatological high, certainly what has changed now is, as it was mentioned, we've gone through a very rapid change from record lows to record highs. So 2012 being at record low, and now just kind of continuing to be at record high for a few years now. And so the dynamics that are at play, Commissioner Davis really did touch on quite well, because it is a balance. Of course, we're not in a balance right now, between precipitation, runoff, and evaporation. And we just really, those three things are not cooperating right now. And so we are seeing everything pull together to just have us be in this uncomfortably high situation.
One of the things I've been getting a lot lately is the weather formations and how they are impacting precipitation element and stuff. And it seems like climate change is making the weather, weather used to go from west to east pretty much all the time. Only occasionally would it go up from the south, and only occasionally would you get a nor'easter kind of thing. But now it seems like those patterns are just happening more and more, that the driving dynamic is changing, and that's what's messing with our precipitation.
Yeah, I think that is right, because our system is out of balance. And so since it is so out of balance, in an attempt to achieve balance, non-normal things are happening with our weather patterns. That's certainly true.
I got and Commissioner Davis talked about nor'easters and how that messes us up, because the big waves come and hit our shore. And you kind of, sometimes you don't know what that really means, but I was out at Illinois Beach State Park, and they have like 4 tributaries where the runoff from all the towns up above goes through the park and it comes down into the lake. And when the nor'easter comes, the guys from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources know that it's trouble, because it's going to push all this sand and gravel in front of those outlets. And these are tributaries that are the size of 2-lane car highways and things like that. And I went up there in March and saw one of these things that had been plugged since the big thing since January. And I mean plugged with more gravel than you can imagine. It was like gigantic houses of gravel come down in front of that tributary, and it was flooding the rest of Illinois Beach State Park. The unintended consequences of something like that, and the power of something like that, is it's just kind of mind blowing at times. It's you don't realize what you're getting into. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, nothing to add. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to make it there and see this myself. So I'll have to add that to my list of things to do once travel is allowed once again.
I'll swing over to Tom. And Tom, do you watch for nor'easters now? Because like the Illinois Department of Natural Resources.
Jerome, can I jump in with a very quick?
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jerome. It sounded like you were going to keep going. I'll just tell a very quick story because I don't want to hang our other panelists up. But it's a personal story, but you guys are all family. I'll tell it to you. You know, along the lakefront here, there are giant limestone boulders that are reduce the wave energy that comes in. And on one of these giant rocks, a 1-ton boulder is where I presented my wife her engagement ring. That 1-ton boulder, this past January storm that we had, was literally lifted up and taken back out into the lake. So your anecdote about sand and gravel plugging the Dead River and some of the other tributaries in Illinois Beach State Park, it's a very forceful one, and we're seeing the manifestation of those kinds of forces in incredibly powerful ways, like 1-ton boulders being displaced. And you can see that along Northwestern University's lakefront campus as well. That's it. I just wanted to add to your story.
Tom, do you watch for nor'easters now?
I do, and easterly winds. In fact, in 1986, when you see those photos of Lakeshore Drive shutting down, when the lake was high then, there was the February storm that shut down the city. That was actually not even, it wasn't a northeasterly, it was gale force winds from the east driving all the surface water in. But yeah, I mean, you know when that happens. Patrick has a photo of the building just next to Rogers Beach that I'd like to show you what that looks like if you live in one of those buildings when you have a huge northeasterly. Patrick, can you call that up?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
And then this kind of demonstrates the fact that we have real estate, people living in buildings that are potentially threatened. But this is an amazing photo. Okay, so you can see that wave and you see porches, those are condominiums. There are actually condominiums on the lake level on that first floor where you see that picture window. And there is a pier next to the building. And these waves are coming up against the building. And you can see what happened to the Jersey barriers that were where those little rods were. They were on the pier at Rogers Beach, and they just bounced away. So in what Cam was talking about was ton boulders moving around. These are Jersey barriers getting blown away. And it's very amazing amounts of force going on here. So yeah, we do watch for that. I was actually in one of those condos in the January storm because I'm a landlord and I have plywood. They said, could you come over? Because windows were getting blown in and water was coming into people's apartments. Pretty amazing.
That is powerful. Mila, do you have any ways of powerful water coming at you?
Powerful water coming at me? No, not really. I realize I'm new to living so close to the lake. My first experience with like storms was, I think it was a 2011 storm that hit Chicago, and I was living in a basement apartment where I got flooded out in 2 feet of standing water. But maybe not the water coming at me, but the solutions coming at the community, yes. When I first started graduate school, there was the dune habitat development at 63rd Street Beach. At that time, there was feedback from the community saying that they were completely taken aback that a part of the beach was being removed from recreational usage and given to birds. That's kind of the summation of it, which, you know, to some extent is true. There was very little environmental education for the significance of that duneland habitat for the protection of the, you know, natural shoreline. So that was my first kind of experience with this either or, dealing with the water, more specifically Lake Michigan and the Black community in Chicago. And it's interesting because there are different stories about how people have advocated for, or, you know, for resources for shoreline erosion on the south side, and some people saying like, nobody's ever spoken to us about it before. So for me, just kind of literally getting my feet wet into the conversation, now that I am also literally live right across the street from Lake Michigan. I live in Hyde Park, right on Hyde Park Boulevard. It gives me a better understanding. But, you know, as a member of the Jackson Park Yacht Club, you know, one day I'm hanging out, you know, upstairs and chilling with my friends, having a drink. And then the next day, the parking lot is half underwater, and it's so much water that the geese don't even want to be bothered with it. So it definitely changes access depending on, you know, where I am.
You know, after the flooding in January, it seemed like there was a lot of back and forth about, well, the north side's getting the money, the south side's not getting money. Is that constant? I mean, is that just that's just something that happens all the time?
Yes, I think so. You know, I do realize that the people don't necessarily talk at the same time to each other, right? So you have the conversations on the north side of Chicago with north side residents and the city, and then you have conversations on the south side. And there's not a lot of communication across. When I was at the freshwater lab, it was very clear that we're having insular conversations about water, and they're very, very place-based. But in terms of a coalition that's inclusive, not so much. So there are sentiments about inequitable access to resources, or spaces that would be higher priority, which everyone believes to be the north side of Chicago in comparison to the south side. But again, depending on who you talk to, those sentiments completely change.
When it comes to solutions to high water issues, they all cost a lot of money, and they all have kind of like a variable success rate. I'm worming into some of those. Tom, I know you've thought a lot about this, and probably what Mila's saying kind of resonates with you. What do you, when the solutions come out, when people roll out different plans, what do you hear? I think you're
on mute. There's a lot of debate about sand management and the sand flow. I personally, Mila, on the south side, those South Shore neighborhoods that have similar lakefront to Rogers Park, they have a lot of the same issues. We have the issue where we feel neglected compared to the North Shore. Northwestern builds an island, collects all kinds of sand on the other side of the island. That sand never comes to Rogers or Juneway beaches. Evanston has groins capturing sand, but nothing, Chicago, everything stops at the border. And then Chicago's on its own, and Chicago isn't really all that effective by itself. But I do hear solutions of a buffer between the lakefront, the private property, and the lake, the last 4 miles plan. But I also hear that people who have lakefront property don't necessarily want that buffer of land between them and the lake, because that means it would be public land, and they don't want to give up their private piers and their private private beaches or whatever to parkland. But I'm thinking, and I've approached neighbors on the lake side of the street. I'm on the non-lake side. I've said, you know, I'm concerned about you because you're across the street from me, and if your buildings get deteriorate because people start abandoning them, that's my problem. And I'm sure the exact same issues happen on the south side. And in 2009, the 100-year anniversary of the Burnham Plan, Burnham in 1909 wanted to have the whole lakefront public access. And that didn't happen. It happened up to Hollywood on the north, and maybe Jackson Park on the south side. But the remaining parts of the city had lots of private property on the water. Well, that photo I showed you shows what happens if you have property right on the water and the water level keeps going up. Both the south side communities on the lakefront and the north side are going to be faced with what's the solution. And the Friends of the Park in 2009 presented the Last 4 Miles project, where they basically finished Lincoln Park up and down, north and south to the borders of the city, and create parkland and intelligent habitat and beaches and groins and peninsulas to capture sand. Personally, I think that's the solution. It's billions of dollars, but what's it worth to save our parks, save our buildings?
Cam Davis, do you want to talk a little bit about solutions here and you know, some of these various plans that have been floated out there and the kind of difference between the North Shore, the north side, the south side?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and I feel like what has been inequitable is now becoming equalized because there's virtually no money for anybody in any level of government. But one solution I think that's really important is, and Tom, you just painted this picture very well, is there really is no coordination among jurisdictions. So there can be a very different coastal management system, and I'm speaking historically, you know, going back decades, not necessarily right now, because thankfully we do have a coastal management program within the Illinois Department of Natural Resources that we didn't have until very recently. But the North Shore can do things that are very different from the city. And that actually is a dynamic that goes on all around the Great Lakes. What I do think we need is a regional approach to coastal management. If we have one private property owner putting hardened shorelines in to protect what little beach they may have, then it has an impact downdrift in the neighboring properties. And then it becomes this chain reaction. The other issue I think we have is we have a lot of jetties that go out into the lake. They're also called groins. Many of these were built in the 1950s through the 1970s. They have about a 50-year life cycle or life expectancy to them. They can live and be functional a little longer than that. But what happens when it's time for these jetties to expire? We're not poised to think about the opportunities that go along with those kind of expirations. Do we rebuild them? Do we do something different? Do we take them down completely? Every single option in that decision tree will have ramifications. It'll have ramifications for private property owners. It will have ramifications for beaches and coastal parks and things like that. But Jerome, the short answer to your question, what can we do? One of them is to have a harmonized regional approach to coastal management.
How does that happen? How do you get a regional approach to coastal management? Is there an institution, a Great Lakes institution, that does that for you? Or it seems like the only person with the power to crack the whip would be the federal government in some way with some kind of funding or initiative. Is that who makes?
Sure. Well, one tool that has been proposed over the past several years has been a Great Lakes Coastal Resilience Study that the Corps of Engineers would lead. And I should mention the Corps of Engineers really has the lead federal role on shoreline protection. But the Coastal Resilience Study is something that Congress has authorized with funding over the past several years, but then also over the past several years, the White House has stepped in to prohibit the Corps of Engineers from moving forward on that study. But that's the kind of tool that can be used to try to get Illinois and Wisconsin and Indiana and so on to come up with common best practices for coastal management. And there also needs to be short, medium, and long-term thinking on this as well. You know, working for an engineering firm, even though I'm not an engineer, I'm coming to learn about a new term that I've never heard before called managed retreat. And what we're seeing is in places around the Great Lakes, infrastructure is almost literally, not quite literally, but almost literally being picked up and moved inland. For example, there's a roadway in Marquette, Michigan, that's been very close to Lake Superior that is now being dismantled and being essentially rebuilt further upland in order for there to be transportation, whereas had that road continued to stay in place, Lake Superior would essentially just ripped out the road for us. I know I had a picture for Patrick that I wanted to try to flash. Patrick, if you're there, if you don't mind showing the picture very quickly. But the thing that is interesting about this picture that we're going to share with you just momentarily here is, there it comes. This is, yeah, it's a really powerful picture. And the thing that I really like about it is it's indicative of what we were talking about before, where you don't necessarily have to have a big rain event. This picture was taken, and I think, Jerome, it was on the WBEZ website for a long time. It was taken during Superstorm Sandy, which, as we know, was a hurricane that buffeted the East Coast, not the Great Lakes. But in that storm, or at least the aftershocks of that storm, we felt those here with 20 to 25-foot waves pounding the coastline, even though we didn't have a rainstorm. So we're also seeing the effects of weather patterns 1,000 miles away having these very devastating impacts here in the heartland, where we have become accustomed to being somewhat insulated from those storms on the saltwater coasts.
I wanted to ask a question, kind of back on the solutions side of things, and I read an article in the New York Times, and it was by what was it? Peter, the Great Lakes Water Wars author, and
right.
And he was kind of big on, I guess, what you're calling managed retreat from the lake, but he was encouraged more buyouts of people that, you know, we don't want to do landfill and parkway, it costs too much. Let's just buy people out who are close to the lake and manage our retreat and start thinking about our shoreline as what it is, and it's got to have some flex spots, and if people are in it, you know, doesn't matter if they're in the north side or the south side, let's buy them out and let's get them further back from the lake. Does that sound like a scenario that if the lake stays high, people are going to go to, that people would bite into? Mila, do you want to say something?
Yeah, a couple of things I was thinking about. I had never heard of managed retreat. So I'm over here like, oh, let me write that down. And I think the first thing that came to mind on the south side was my concerns about, you know, disaster preparedness and displacement. So in the event of a crisis that causes tremendous flooding, you know, and barriers are broken or walls are falling, is the city, or does the city have a plan for evacuation or protection or support? Then there is the displacement and the removal of people and how property values then shift. So those properties that then are removed from, being so close to the lake that are high value, and now they're gone. Does that mean that the properties west of them increase in value, and they're kind of like new winners, so to speak? Which is interesting to think about, in terms of property values for the South Side and African Americans who live in that community. But I also think that it's important to put this into the context of how it is that we need to be thinking about other landscapes as well. And I know we're talking about water, but there are so many other places that people of color live that need similar remedies. It's interesting that Cam said that, this issue is neutralizing. Like, nobody has any money. And oddly, as an environmental justice person, that kind of feels new for me, right? There's an ally in, North Side residences that some people may feel didn't exist before. Like, our communities deal with some of the most harmful environmental issues, and now no one can escape this, and solutions are coming that would benefit everyone. And I'm wondering, how is it that we keep that same energy for environmental issues that are still the burden of our most vulnerable populations? Because this is an opportunity for us to kind of reconcile how we negotiate solutions depending on priorities or places that we think are worth protecting initially. It's also my hopes that solutions would be inclusive of educating the public. Again, we want feedback from the community, but there is a certain level of environmental knowledge about climate change that people do need to have in order to give productive feedback for what it is that they want. And for me, that's something that's extremely important.
I was noticing one of the proposals that we were looking at that Tom sent me was the last 4-mile plan for lots more lakefront with parks, and it had parks on the north side and parks on the south side. It had a park there at the mouth of the Calumet River that was supposed to happen. And now at the mouth of the Calumet River, the Army Corps of Engineers is going to dump more dredged material, kind of toxic dredged material, in this place that kind of, a lot of people thought the solution there was nicer. Moza Park was, there's that kind of thing going on right now.
Yes, absolutely. And these water issues are interconnected in many unique ways. And it's going to require us to think a little bit more holistically. And it's not the South Side versus the North Side. And it's events like this that allow for us to continue to network and share what is going on around the city. And thank you so much for your work in journalism. Like, environmental journalism really does keep people up to date on what is going on. It's not a lot of it that happens, but I, definitely appreciate the many stories and the context of the stories to keep Chicagoans informed. Because with us being so segregation does play a part in how it is we understand what is going on for what community. We cannot escape that. And through writing and media, the stories of Chicago, we're a big city, 6 million people, 9 million people in the metro area. It's restaurants we'll never get to and never know exist, right? So these forums allow for these stories to make their way around, and people can start to make the connections for large-scale solutions that need to happen for intersectional issues.
Veronica, I've been wheeling away from you here. I wanted to know if you have any response to some of what you've been hearing here.
I think my only response would be that I'm also learning a lot of new things right now, which I'm really appreciative of. And I think too, Commissioner Davis said that in terms of creating these plans, one of the trickiest pieces is planning at both the short-term, medium-term, and long-term ranges, because the actions that are required for the here and now might not be always the best for the long term. And so that's one of the trickiest points to work out in terms of building resiliency in our communities.
I'm thinking about some of the, some people are saying, well, the lake water levels are really high now, but they could go down really fast, just as fast as they went up. And then we all stop talking about this, and we think it's all, we don't have to spend any money. Oh, great. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to make any kind of plan. So that's like the long term is almost impossible.
And we just have very short attention spans these days.
Jerome, I would say we have to plan long term for both highs and lows. And if you did a very sustainable design like you have in the last 4 miles, that would work for high and low. You'd have more beach or less beach, but you'd have beach. The idea of moving things inland, I don't think that works for Chicago. I don't think you can do that, where you can't move downtown. In South Shore, you've got high rises, you're not going to move them. I think the idea of having a buffer, islands, whatever, it has to be taken on. When they put these rocks down, our alderwoman said, this is a 3 to 5 year fix. And all the neighbors say, oh yeah, right. These rocks are going to be here the rest of our lives. But it really is a short-term save the parks fix. But long-term, we have to do something much more drastic and much more resilient and much more sustainable, in my opinion.
Cam, did you want to weigh in on buyout programs and what the viability of something like that is?
Sure. Thanks, Jerome. There is precedent for buyout programs like the kind that Peter Annan mentioned and you mentioned in his New York Times opinion piece. Even though it does not apply to the lakefront, for example, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District will buy out buildings and private properties in floodplains, places that are prone to flooding on the interior of the county. And MWRD is not alone in doing that. The Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage Department, the counterpart in the Milwaukee area, also does that as well. So there are government entities that are authorized to conduct buyouts for flood-prone properties. But I think Peter's hit the nail on the head. You've hit the nail on the head. That approach for the lakefront is not really viable. We have the Coastal Management Program that does authorize buyouts, but buyouts tend to be very controversial as well. And so as a result, agencies tend, for the coast, I should say, tend to steer clear of that.
But if we had a sophisticated long-term program that was equitable, that was going up and down the whole shore of Illinois, it's only 60 some miles. We said, here's what we're doing. We're pulling out these groins. We're gonna move back in some spots here. This is that would be a satisfying thing. That would be a way that you could do some buyouts, or it would seem if you're going to spend less, substantially less.
Over time, I think that's right, and you see this with other jurisdictions. For example, in holdings within national parks. If there's private property within a national park, the National Park Service can be authorized to buy, over time, buy those private properties. The people who live in them get to live in them until they die, so they get to retain them, retain the benefits of living within that national park. But over years or even decades, there's a prioritization scheme for a buyout to happen.
All right, I'm gonna swing over and do some of the questions on the chat. If you have a question, go ahead, plug it in there. We've talked about a lot of different things, and we can go back to other things. One of the questions do funding, and how can the region circumvent the inaction of the federal government? And to Ms. Marshall's point, how can the region find money, activate political will to address these issues? And the study you were talking about funding, Cam, correct me if I'm wrong, it's only $12 million. It's not like for that the study on what to do about the rising lake levels. It would seem like we should be able to find money sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, and I was being a little tongue-in-cheek when I said there's no money. I'm a big believer that there's always money when, as Mila says, you find it's amazing how when you find the political will, you also find money. You know, and I've been in front of congressional subcommittees where I've heard congressmen and congresswomen say, we don't have the money. In the 1990s, when we were sitting on top of probably the most robust economy in the world's history at the time. So yes, we do have the money when we have the political will. And that study, you know, would not be intended to actually do something. The implementation of anything that is recommended in a study, that's extra. But if we want to do things in the short run, there are lots of short-term fixes to help protect the shoreline. And we've talked about some of them here. We've talked about boulders and jetties and things like that. But if we want to break the cycle and find ways to not have to go from a crisis to crisis and emergency to emergency, and be able to create for ourselves a more equitable, just society living in coastal communities like we do, that takes long-term planning.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on the money issue?
So I am familiar with the Carbon Disclosure Project and kind of worked on this with Delta a little bit, and it may be an opportunity depending on the projects that Chicago already has scoped out, but that project does have resources from the private sector specifically for municipalities to use for infrastructure projects to manage impacts of climate change in some way. So I think also just, you know, being clever with how we use those resources. And I'm always a fan of promoting, like, oh man, you know, our city cannabis taxes and investing that in wise ways, whether it is helping to financially support the Department of Environment for the City of Chicago so that we have thinkers and brains and, you know, people working on collaborating for a holistic solution for the metro region, or, you know, other opportunities to get funding. So, yeah.
A couple things have to do with sand and beach management. What can we do to keep our beaches on the North Shore? Can someone speak to hard engineered surfaces, impact on sand movement? Does that mean we need to be addressing shoreline erosion and beach loss as a long continuous system encompassing Wisconsin and Indiana to avoid kind of, how do we get everybody to get along on this?
I think we need, this is Tom, I think we need funding for the Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study that Cam mentioned, because that is addressing holistically all of the lakes, not just Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, the Great Lakes. It has to be that way. And I think in terms of hard surfaces, you have to address the environmental impacts of what you're doing to your shoreline in terms of the downstream effects of sand. So I'm saying it's much bigger than our little teeny section of Lake Michigan that encompasses Illinois. I think that's absolutely right.
When I was doing some reporting on Illinois Beach State Park, they have money from the Illinois legislature, $40 million to build offshore underwater that are going to deposit sand. In theory, they're going to be angled a series of them that will revisit sand on the shores of Illinois Beach State Park, which has no beaches, is just like it's up to the prairies there. And so does anybody have faith in that as a solution, that you could find clever ways, that there is new ways to redeposit sand if we kind of get a modern system going? Cam?
Sure. The thing that I really love about the Illinois Beach State Park plan, and Wisconsin is also looking at doing something off of Kenosha, is that it's innovative. You know, in so many parts of our lives, whether it's IT, using the laptops that we're now using to interface with one another, you see innovation happening all the time. In the world of coastal engineering, we're still thinking about boulders and jetties. You know, so the fact that the Illinois DNR is willing to experiment and essentially use Illinois Beach State Park as a laboratory to try something new is really inspiring to me, because we need to keep trying new things. We need to keep experimenting, and we need to capture those lessons, even if they fail or if they succeed. We need to capture those lessons and build those lessons into a best practices warehouse like the resilience study, so that all municipalities, all states, even the provinces and the two federal governments can learn from what works and what doesn't, and we can encourage each other to keep trying new things rather than rely on the same approaches that were built back decades ago.
All right, it is an interesting thing, because Illinois place where through all of them in the decades. They've got the groins, they've got I stood on top of the gigantic boulders that were getting tossed into the lake like peanuts all of a sudden, and they all give out at some point, all the things we've done.
Right.
Here's a question. Can panelists talk about the impact of water levels on different communities north and south? What are the equity issues that we should be aware of? Is there something we haven't hit on that we think should slip into?
I can think of one thing, but let me pause, because I feel like I've already talked more than my fair share. Speaking of equity.
Mila?
I'm going to defer to Cam. I want to hear what you have to say, and I might have something to add.
All right, sounds good. So, you know, we were talking just before about how we have high water levels now, and I think Mila, Tom, Veronica have all done a good job of talking about some of the inequities that can occur in different parts of the lakefront. But inequities can also happen when lake levels go down too far as well. We've seen in the past, you know, years ago when we were at nearing record low levels, or at least below average levels, that what happens is there's increased pressure to then dredge some of our most industrialized harbors and rivers, places that have contaminated sediment. And if we don't dredge those places, then that contamination can get stirred up. It can contribute pollution that then winds up moving through the food chain, which can then create equity problems there for people who rely on fishing for subsistence, people who rely on Great Lakes fish for an inexpensive food source. So if the lake levels go down too far, you know, what I'm saying is be careful what you wish for. If you're worried about lake levels being too high now, we should caution ourselves against thinking that, gee, we want these lake levels to go down really, really far, because there can be kind of cascading impacts from that as well. So I try not to think of lake levels as being good or bad. I know, as Mila said before, we tend to think in terms of these binary yes and no, up and down ways, but high versus low is not necessarily good versus bad either. So I just wanted to mention there are also equity considerations that can go into really low lake levels as well.
So I think, yes, everything you said. And when we think about equity in the environment, a lot of the conversation from the Southside community is being included in all conversations in a timely manner at all levels. And there is, there's the city, and I know we have our, what is it? The Committee on the Environment, right? And then there is the Park District and the various departments within Park District that people need to engage with. And there's Friends of the Park as well. So I think in terms of what we need to be aware of is understanding who needs to be brought to the table. There are quite a few environmental organizations. There's environmentalists of color, but then there are also very few organizations that focus on water on the South Side. And you'll find most of the conversation is being pushed by individuals that live in South Shore. So for me, it is making sure that the network is reflective of the people that are most impacted, as well as helping support decision makers understanding about some of these environmental issues and how they're connected. Because again, climate change is something that is talked about, but when you think about how it is discussed in Black Chicago and in the African American community, there is not a lot of awareness about the issues that our communities face and what communities are facing what issues. So there is an opportunity here to not only kind of use water as this neutralizing conversation between North and South, because it's always been the South Side, the West Side versus the North Side. It is literally like, it's more like 3 Chicagos than 2. So it is more focused on how do we build a network that's reflective and diverse, and how then do we share in the solution making and engaging scholars from the South Side. So Chicago State University and our scholars and people who would like to be a part of the conversation, but have no way in.
All right, very good. I wanted to ask a question. Maybe Tom, you would want to weigh in on this first, but one of the questions is, what key initiatives or legislative tracks exist that we can join and advocate for? Are there people in the city council that are champions that we should keep tabs on? Are there water coastal management champions out there that we should glom onto and think about?
Well, like I said, that Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study, Senator Durbin tried to get the White House to fund that. So that's something everybody can get behind. In terms of initiatives for the Park District, I don't see it as a North Side, South Side thing. I don't even see it as a minority versus white, whatever. I just think we all have the same issues with these lakefront issues. The South Shore, those people living in condominiums on the water are having the exact same issues as up here. I'd say we got a lot of attention because we made a lot of noise. Our Park Advisory Council made a lot of noise. We got a lot of the news media behind us. Our alderwoman got behind us and our former alderman. But I think you just have to make a lot of noise. It's not just environmental. It's we need to work together. I don't know how you get the Southsiders together with the Northsiders. I mean, really, it's Rogers Park, Hyde Park, South Shore. We all feel forgotten because we're not Lincoln Park, we're not downtown. So you have to fight for your own little areas. And if you can do that together, hey, everybody would sign up. But I don't know how you I know our Alderwoman Haddon, has talked with some of the South Side aldermen and alderwomen to come together. But I'm not sure what the solution is. I don't know how you make that all happen.
It makes me think about, I'm sorry, Tom.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
It makes me think about the value of our academic institutions. So, you know, I am partial to UIC, but we do have the Institute for Environmental Science and Policy, for example. And I'm wondering what it looks like to, you know, work with our academic institutions to help some of these conversations along. How is it that we use universities to be a neutral place where not only researchers have an opportunity to engage with community members to get inspired to ask relevant research questions that will result in information that can be actually used by decision makers to make the best science-informed policy decisions, but then just be a place where people can begin to come together. We have at the Freshwater Lab been talking about what does it mean to be an academic ally, and that's also something that I am deeply interested in learning, you know, the role of being an academic person for serving the community, and some of that can be in reconciling this separateness that we do experience. Some of it is just because of geography, like where we're located, and simply because we're far away doesn't mean that we don't care. But the way that environmental issues are addressed in Chicago are very place-based. That again does not mean that just because I'm advocating for, you know, Burger Park and that I love the little restaurant. They have the best jerk nachos ever. But I'm gonna, you know, I did that because I was a community member and I only had so much energy. But now that I'm in Hyde Park, I will go just as hard for Reggie's on the beach, right? Because that is now where it is that I am located. So it's the question of how do we use this robust network that we already have to bring people together to create solutions.
Right. UIC, University of Chicago, Loyola University, all those places need to be involved. Loyola University has an enormous environmental department, and they've been at some of the meetings, and there are students interested, but trying to get them organized and to get them to have a voice is not as. It's a little easier if you're a voter and you can harass your alder person into action, you know, than to try to coordinate. But for sure, a coalition of environmental departments at the universities, along with community members, we should be using that. We should be using that for more than just environmental purposes. We've got all these great universities.
All right, we're coming up on time here, but I wanted to give anybody a last chance to wind up here. Some final actions, any other actions you can think of to take away and get out there and do. Cam?
Sure. Well, I think what I'd like to do, Jerome, is just invite everybody that's part of this conversation to be in touch with my office. I have two roles. One is as a commissioner to try to move the water reclamation district in a much more forward-thinking direction. But I also as an elected official. So please be in touch with me if you have thoughts, ideas, interested in ways we can help. My email address is davis.c@mwrd.org, and Dawn Walker in my office is Walker, W-A-L-K-E-R-D as in Dawn, @mwrd.org. We would love to hear from you and be in touch about ideas and how we can potentially help. Thank you, Jerome. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Mila. Thank you, Tom. And thanks to the Delta Institute.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. This was a great discussion, and I think we covered a lot of bases. Thank you, Veronica, Tom, Mila. And I'll swing it back to Bill for some concluding remarks.
This was such a great conversation, and we had a lot of questions that we couldn't get to. So we're going to be posting the video of the panelist conversation and the questions that we did get to on Facebook, on YouTube later this week. But we also will be taking the questions and getting them out to the panelists and curating a suite of answers, and you'll see that on Delta Institute's blog. Obviously, this is really complicated, and these are the types of things that we love working on here with our partners across the region. So we're going to continue this conversation. This is kind of just the get-go of it, and stay tuned for a lot of interesting stuff that we have happening at Delta over the next several months. And thanks for everybody for sticking around for this great conversation. We'll now let you get back to your normal other sorts of Zoom activities for the evening. And please be on the lookout for all of the new news. Thanks.
And a few last things from Delta. Please mark on your calendars for November. The Deltas are going to be hosting our annual Boost event. It will be virtual for the first time. And to wrap things up, if you are interested in supporting us, you can visit the link there, delta-institute.org/donate. The silent auction is still live. We did reach our goal. Thank you, everybody. That will be live until tomorrow at 8 p.m. So still gives you time to take a look and see what's going on there. And we will have a quick event survey. The link is there, bit.ly/30WITRY. I'll leave the screen up for a little bit if anybody wants to jot down these URLs. But thank you again for everybody. Have a wonderful evening.